They're in. Governor was telling me about when they announced the program, there's 3,000 slots and about 10,000 people immediately tried to sign on. Well, look, these wetlands act as a critical buffer between the rising tides and the communities at risk, protecting homes, property, and infrastructure against flooding. They also absorb carbon dioxide from the air, and we're right next to Route 101, and where cars and trucks emit a lot of carbon pollution. What we're seeing here is an amazing success story of how you can work together to make our communities more climate resilient. It matters. It matters. Resiliency matters. You know, I've toured many sites across the country that clearly show climate change is a genuine, is the existential threat to humanity. The existential threat to humanity. Here in California, the governor, you and I stood together with first responders near Monterey Bay after touring the damage that was done. The devastating storms caused historic flooding that killed 21 people. That comes on the heels of the worst droughts in California in more than a millennia, and the highest sea level rise in more than a century. I've seen wildfire devastation across the West, burning more acres to the ground than are square miles in the state of Maryland. That's how much got burned to the ground, and all the just flying over it is devastating. There's been historic tornadoes and flooding in the Midwest and the Southeast. And just last week across the East Coast and Midwest, we saw what you've already seen here in California. Millions of Americans sheltering indoors. The air not safe to breathe, orange haze covering the sky. It's incredible. By the way, to address those wildfire smoke that's coming from Canada, we're sharing cutting-edge technology that's already used here in California to help detect early fires and help them in sending, in addition to that, firefighters and tankers as well. Folks, the impacts we're seeing in climate change are only going to get more frequent and more ferocious and more costly. Last year alone, natural disasters in America caused $165 billion in damage. Just last year alone, $165 billion in damage. But the worsening impacts are not inevitable. Building on our incredible effort locally, my administration is doing all we can to help recover and build so we can be prepared to and adapt. You know, it's all part of my Invest in America agenda the governor was referencing. It starts with the most significant climate investment law ever, anywhere in the history of the world. Over billions and billions, $368 billion, 369 to be precise, in clean energy development, environmental justice, conservation, and so much more. We will cut 1 billion tons of carbon emission a year, create millions of good-paying jobs. It's already attracting billions of dollars in the private sector because businesses are realizing it's overwhelming their interest. As a matter of fact, a couple of businesses are suing banks because they want to consider whether or not you're environmentally, anyway, I won't get into all that. But I want to emphasize again, we're taking the most aggressive climate action ever. It's focused on mitigation, which means historic investments in developing clean energy by reducing dependence on fossil fuel, and resilience, which means communities. Communities can better withstand the impacts of climate change and extreme weather. With the combination of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, we've invested more than $50 billion so far in climate resilience. Nearly $9 billion to make transportation infrastructure more resilient by elevating roads and bridges above projected flood zones. $13 billion to decrease the wildfire risk and improve forest health and paying for firefighters who risk their lives every day. Drought mitigation, $15.4 billion to bolster the West's resilience to drought. These investments are being made in the context of a mega drought affecting the Colorado River Basin. 40 million Americans already drinking water thousands of farmers rely on for integration. And 40 million count on that river, and so do the farmers. $6.6 billion in coastal resilience restoration of reefs and construction of other infrastructure to mitigate storm damage, plus more than $17 billion from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to bolster resilience for coastal water and waterways infrastructure, including funding to address food, floods, storms, hurricane risk, and restore coastal ecosystems. Climate-smart agriculture, nearly $20 billion in funding for precision irrigation and planting cover crops, plus a $1 billion America the Beautiful challenge to accelerate locally led conservation efforts. Folks, flood mitigation, $3.5 million, reduce and eliminate the risk of repetitive flood damage to buildings, plus $1 billion in funding mitigation measures to increase community resilience, like supporting adaptations of hazard-resistant building codes. And maybe most important, I've committed that by 2020, we will have conserved 30% of all the lands and waters the United States has jurisdiction over, and simultaneously reduce emissions to blunt climate impacts. We're on our way. Conservation, land and water, we put more in conservation and land and water than any president in the history of the United States since but John Kennedy. We're leading the way in Palo Alto and East Palo Alto and to Bellhaven. For instance, a local nonprofit called Climate Resilient Communities gives community, thank you. Are you all part of that? Thank you. Gives members a voice in planning and adaptation. I'm here today to announce that we're putting our critical climate investment to work. Folks, first, starting tomorrow, the Department of Commerce will launch the first and largest competitive climate resilience regional challenge to provide $600 million to coastal and Great Lake communities that are building projects to protect against impacts of climate change from sea level rise, flooding, and storm surge. We're investing in the people and places that have been hit the hardest, but who are also on the front lines of leading us forward. Folks, second thing we're doing, the Department of Energy is going to announce that it's investing more than $2 billion to modernize our electric grid to be more climate resilient, including more than $67 million starting off in California. That funding can help ensure our electric grid is stronger, that the lights and air conditioning and internet stay on during heat waves and storms and other climate events, so the lights can stay on in hospital operating rooms, nursing homes, and so many other critical care facilities. And third, later this year, we're hosting the first ever White House Summit that convenes local, state, tribal, and territorial leaders focused on climate resilience. It's going to include a roadmap for how these historic climate actions are going to build more climate resilient communities all across America, saving lives and homes, providing peace of mind. This is how we're going to meet the moment. This is how we're going to, unfortunately, some of our MAGA Republican friends in Congress are continuing to try to undo all the progress we've already made in the first 2.5 years. They were holding the country hostage over the debt limit unless I would gut the climate provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. I was determined not to let that happen. With your significant help, and I mean that sincerely, all of you here, particularly Ann and the House and the Congress, we didn't let that happen. And in the end, we didn't just protect some of the climate money and clean energy provisions. We protected every single solitary one. But this ain't your father's Republican Party. They're back at it again with another bill to repeal the same provisions. But with your help, we're going to stop them again. Let me close with this. Throughout our history, we're the only nation in the world that has come out of every crisis we've entered stronger than we went into it. We're doing it again here on the climate crisis. When I think of climate, I think of jobs. When I think of climate, I think of innovation. When I think of jobs, climate, I think of turning peril into progress. That's why I'm so optimistic about the future. I really am. I just have to remember who in hell we are. We're the United States of America, for God's sake. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we work together. And that's what all of you are doing here, have been doing, and we're going to continue to do. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Let's go get them. Let's get this done.